the circular economy, in a way, as you can see from this diagram, it looks a bit complicated, but it's very much a systems perspective or systems approach to manage the relationship of our production and consumption systems with the biophysical environment. And at the moment, this relationship is a little bit out of balance, because we are taking too many reserves into our production consumption system. At the same time, there's too much leakage of waste and emissions from these various stages of value chains. Take, make, dispose. You might have heard this before as a description of the linear system that we have at the moment. But there's a lot of thinking and practices which can be applied, and you can see these here. These are sort of, we call them circular economy practices that can be used to create more circularity of materials within the system. So prevention by designing out avoidable waste, shared consumption, reuse and repair, remanufacturing, and recycling are some of the main approaches. And it's important to highlight that recycling is not necessarily the most preferable option. So there's a lot more resources can be saved, and waste can be reused by, for example, sharing and reuse. In the discussions, often recycling is mentioned quite a lot, but it's not necessarily the most effective solution. And from the question that you sent, there's also many problems with the current recycling system. So just wanted to show this other slide, which is something that we're using a lot in Chatham House publications. So you have the value chain here, and one of the approaches is about creating loops. So looping materials or components back from the end of life into the various stages of the value chain. Again, here some of the practices: repair, reuse, remanufacturing, recycling. In addition to creating these loops, there's also other important approaches. One is what we call narrowing flows. That means reducing the throughput of materials that goes through the system. And this can be achieved by changing utilization patterns. So the other one is about slowing flows, which means slowing the throughput of materials. And this can be achieved through, for example, extending the use cycle. And one of the issues, for example, here is the concept of planned obsolescence that you might know about. So many products are designed in a way that they break easily or need to be replaced or cannot be repaired. So that's one of the main obstacles that we're also trying to address through the circular economy. So very often the circular economy traditionally has been a very technical approach. So there's a lot of focus on engineering solutions. There's a lot of focus on what you maybe call a technological fix. However, this is now also beginning to change, and issues of behavior, social norms are also becoming more relevant. Consumer behavior, these types of issues are now increasingly becoming part of the circular economy discussions. Furthermore, also the issue, circular economy has often been discussed in the context of Europe or other industrialized countries. So what we also at Chatham House trying to do is also to understand more what's happening in the circular economy space globally. We're also trying to understand how circular economy relates to international development. What type of international cooperation mechanisms are necessary to promote circular economy globally? we're also trying to understand what are potential trade-offs for countries to move towards a circular system. What are challenges and barriers, and what are policy measures, how to overcome them? What are the implications for trade? So these are some of the big topics that we are engaged in. And in addition to this, we're also trying to get actively involved in projects and solutions which and maybe this is when I hand over to Muyola, where we contribute to developing hands-on applications, what can be done to really address some of the pressing issues relating to waste. And so I stop here, and then Muyola can tell you more about our project.
Thank you, Max. So as Max introduced, I'll just be talking briefly about our project I'm doing together with Patrick and a few other colleagues. It's called Ditch Plastic, and what we're doing basically is looking at digital innovations for plastic waste management, or generally waste management in Africa. So I'm sure, well, I guess some of you are from Africa as well, so you know from your questions, you've highlighted some of the problems with waste management in Africa generally. However, one of the things that is a plus on the African continent is the rise of digital innovations, the rise of internet. So where Africa has the fastest internet growth rate. And so there are quite a lot of innovations coming up across the continent. So for example, in Nigeria, there's Recyclers who have developed an app for collecting waste, a private startup. There is also in Uganda, Your Waste, in Kenya, Mr. Green Africa. So you have bits and pieces all around the continent. However, most of these are they are just local. They haven't scaled beyond the city. Some of them have been around for 10 years, 8 years, but they're still local, even though their innovations are quite unique and they can be transformative on the continent. Most of them also work in silos. There's no synergy between them, and quite a bit of them are focused on collection and recycling. So as Patrick highlighted, recycling should not be our first priority. So what we're doing in the Ditch Plastic Network is looking at all this, trying to look at all these digital innovations across Africa, and then appraise them, see what their strengths are, their weaknesses are, and just basically having a good picture of what they are, where they are, what their gaps are, and then seeing what opportunities there are for them to develop further. So funding opportunities, policy landscape, all those sort of things. So what are the gaps, what are the opportunities that can make them to scale, and how can they work together? So basically the Ditch Network is bringing that platform, and hopefully with that, if we can capitalize on our network and our reach, we can accelerate the transition to a circular plastic economy. So basically, just as Patrick highlighted about circularity, so we believe digital innovations can play a key and significant role in that transition. And so how do we get those digital innovations together, and what are the other digital innovations that we need to develop to make that transition happen quickly? Thank you.
Okay, then I thought let's go then to some of the questions that you sent, and I will try to answer some of them. They're all very, very good and relevant, and I don't think I have answers to all of them. But let me start with there's a question that Mateo's raised about. It's a very good question about, is zero waste possible? So yeah, the zero waste concept is often also connected to the circular economy. And it's probably it's not possible to create a fully zero waste world, at least from where we are now. That seems to be a very far goal. However, from where we are now, there's a lot of potential to definitely reduce the amount of waste that we're producing. There's every year or so, there's a Circularity Gap Report, which is published by a Dutch consultancy called Circular Economy. And the latest one, so they calculate that currently the world economy is only 8.6% circular. That means more than 90% of the resources that are being used are just used in a linear way and end up as waste. So there's huge potential to close this gap. And actually, because we're not doing very well at the moment, so there are a lot of low-hanging fruits actually that we can realize. So the closer we get to zero waste, the harder we'll get to narrow this final bit. But I don't think we need to be concerned about this, because we can do a lot from where we are now. In a way, it's also the zero waste idea, though, is still very important, because it gives us a vision of as you say in your comment, the vision of a truly zero waste world. We need to have this vision when we redesign the system. So there's some within the circular economy, there's a lot of comparison to the natural world where there is no waste. So everything becomes input into something else. And if we redesign our production consumption system, our industrial world that we created, keeping in mind how the natural world functions, I think that's an important guidance for us. Maybe I hand over to Muyiwa at the same. Maybe you want to answer another question.
Okay, yes. So thank you, Patrick. I will answer a few, one or two questions, firstly on Africa. So the first one has to do with infrastructure deficits in Africa, which results in a lot of waste going to landfill or littered on streets. And I think just to highlight what Patrick said initially about the circular economy, and he just highlighted that. So if we follow nature, there's really nothing as waste. And so if we look at at least 3 areas of the circular economy: reduce, reuse, and recycle. So if we reduce the number of waste, the amount of waste going to landfill, or the amount of waste in our waste stream, I think the circular economy plays a significant role in tackling that. And then going forward, it's not just about governments, as I've highlighted. So yes, the government has a role to play, a significant role to play, but the realities of Africa is that that's not happening. And so that's why we have quite a lot of these startups coming up. And I think it's the way we see it. So if we begin to see it as value, so there's a business case we made about the circular economy and the waste stream. So it's big business. So it's how do you make that attractive to investors or to people who will come and be able to invest in this type of thing. So most of these startups are doing it on a purely commercial basis. So if we stop seeing it as waste and see it as value, and then I think that can significantly speak to the infrastructure challenges. Okay, so I'll give Patrick the floor.
Okay, there have been a number of questions on waste exports. So Stephanie your question about, for example, Malaysia as the present dumping ground of choice for British and European waste. And that's indeed, and this links to Tommaso, you have a question about what type of international cooperation instrument do we need to address this. And it's indeed a huge issue, and I have not an answer really to this. It definitely needs to be addressed. And I mean, the international trade in waste that has happened for a long time. And China has been the destination of a lot of waste for a long time, until about 2 years ago, when China introduced a ban, especially on plastics. And since this ban then was really important, actually, and it has exposed all the weaknesses of the current system. So consumers in Europe or Japan or the US thought that the waste they put in their recycling bin is taken care of without thinking about what happens with it. And so the reality was, and still is, that it's not being recycled in the place where it's being put in the recycling bin, but it's being shipped to other places. And since China is not accepting the waste anymore, a number of other destinations, including now Malaysia being one of them, have started receiving a lot of the waste. However, this problem has now been addressed partly under the Basel Convention, which regulates shipments of hazardous waste. And so now there are new provisions that came in 2019, which require prior consent of the country receiving waste that hasn't been there before. Now this relates to plastics mainly. And plastics has also been now classified as, if I'm not mistaken, as a hazardous material. So it falls under the Basel Convention. So these are some first steps into the right direction. There's some additional movement happening. What's in discussion is to create a global treaty on marine plastics pollution, which would then also be related to current waste shipments of plastic waste. Plastic is not the only waste that's being shipped. There's a whole range of other materials, especially e-waste. Actually, e-waste is the fastest growing waste stream internationally, and it's also one of the most toxic ones. It's also a very profitable activity to recycle it and pull out various metals and other parts. So the issue with e-waste, there's lack of data. There's lots of illegal shipments and wrong declarations. And then there's the difficulty that it's often, it's hard to tell what is a second-hand laptop, for example, that can be repaired, or what is e-waste. So many of these issues need to be sorted out to be able to manage this in a sustainable way and a just way. Sorry, that was very long. Miwa, back to you.
Okay, so thank you. There's a question about, a few questions about roles of stakeholders. So like governments, is it about governmental action or private companies? And I think my answer to that is everyone plays a key role. So everybody has a significant role in this. So it starts with you and I, the consumer. How do we change our attitudes towards things that, and how do we use stuff to become waste? And then how do we, how do we come together as a network to be able to influence policy, and how do we speak with one voice in that sense? So there are quite a few things happening across Africa, which are quite encouraging. So there are countries that have started implementing black bans. So for example, Rwanda has implemented the plastic bag ban, which has been, I believe, successful from what I gather. There's the Africa Circular Economy Alliance, which is government parastatals coming together across Africa. So there are quite a lot of things happening. There's quite a lot of movement. But I just think everybody has to work in tandem together to make sure that we achieve a common goal.